World leaders have called for calm following Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel. Israel says it has every right to retaliate as members of the G7 biggest countries vow to prevent an uncontrollable regional escalation in the Middle East.
Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has condemned Iran in the strongest terms and joined us now from Westminster. Lord Cameron, it's good to have you on the programme this morning, but it's a very fragile moment in the world. What is your message to Israel, which came under attack on Saturday night, as they say they will exact a price from Iran at a timing that is right for them?
Well, first of all, a huge message of sympathy for the people of Israel who had to endure what would have been an incredibly tense night when over 300 weapons were sent by Iran into their territory with a mission to kill and maim. And it wasn't just drones. It was, over 100 ballistic missiles, over 40 cruise missiles. This was a very serious attack. And also, my other message this morning would be to praise the bravery and skill of the British pilots who backfilled for the Americans in some operations we've been doing over Iraq and Syria countering ISIL, but at the same time were able to take out some of those drones at the same time. But look, this morning, I think the most important thing is to urge a sense of calm. This has been a double defeat for Iran. Not only was their mission a failure, so few of their weapons got through, but it's also revealed to the world just how malign and influence Iran is. And so we're urging our Israeli friends to be smart as well as tough, to use head as well as heart, not to strike back, but to recognise that actually Iran has suffered a tactical and strategic defeat, and Israel should now focus on Hamas and making sure they get that hostage deal and that we try to bring peace and stability to Gaza.
Back in 1983, when we were teenagers, Lord Cameron, the Argentinians invaded British territory, the Falkland Islands, and Margaret Thatcher said that she had no choice but to retaliate, not only because it was right, but because of the message it would send round the world. And the Israelis are saying overnight, the Israeli cabinet is saying, are we in a different position? Surely the right thing for us to do is to follow that example and to strike back, because they have to send a message that this can't be tolerated. Are they right or are they wrong to say that?
Well, I think the two situations are different, and I say this as I was a teenager like you. It was 1982, I think, not 1983, and I visited the Falkland Islands recently, and I'm very proud of what we did there. But it was a different situation. In that case, Argentina had invaded and taken over a piece of British sovereign territory where the people living there wanted to be part of Britain and not part of Argentina. In this situation, Iran has attacked Israel. As I said, it was a significant attack, a big attack, a dangerous attack, a reckless attack, but it was fought off with almost total success. And so, today Israel absolutely has the right to respond. It does have that right. But I think the smart thing for them to do is to recognise the importance of not escalating this conflict. Iran has failed. Leave them with that failure. Leave them with the sense that they are the aggressor. And let's get on and point to Hamas and say, look, the only reason the Gaza conflict is continuing, the only reason those hostages aren't free is you, Hamas, are not taking the deal that's been offered by Israel to release dozens of Palestinian prisoners from their jail, not in return for all of the hostages, but in return for some of the hostages and a pause in the fighting. That's where we want the focus to be today.
It's interesting, the Falklands reference, because The Sun this morning says that our involvement with the RAF Top Guns was the biggest air fight since that conflict. But it very much drags us into what's going on. And the former British ambassador to Iran, Richard Dalton, speaking on Times Radio, said that the UK had made a mistake in allying itself totally with Israel. He said, I would rather they didn't, referring to the RAF being involved. This is not our quarrel. And the way in which Israel has conducted itself, he goes on, has brought on an element of these catastrophes that is now threatening it. Why were we right to be involved? And how much responsibility does Israel bear for what is going on?
I think we were right, because what we're trying to do here is prevent escalation. What we did alongside the Americans, but they played a far greater role, as did the Israeli Defense Shield, was to stop weapons killing people in Israel being sent by Iran and her proxies. And so that was the right thing to do to stop that escalation. I think where the former ambassador is wrong is when he says this is nothing to do with us. Iran is funding the Houthis, who are shooting at British ships in the Red Sea. Iran is funding Hamas, who brought about this calamity with the attacks on October the 7th. Iran is funding Hezbollah, launching rockets into northern Israel, meaning that over 100,000 Israelis can't go to their homes. And crucially, here we are sitting in a television studio. Iran is funding and paying for people to come to Britain and try and kill journalists who work for Iran TV, many of whom are British citizens. This is a malign player. This is a country we do have to deal with extremely toughly. That's why we put in place over 400 sanctions. I'm sure the Prime Minister will be talking today about what more we can do on that front. But the fundamental issue of should we have sent those RAF planes up into the skies to replace what America was doing over the skies of Iraq and Syria? Yes, we should. It was squarely in our national interest.
You told MPs a couple of months ago that you were worried that Israel may be in breach of international law in the way it was acting in Gaza. And that was why you were keeping under review the question of an arms embargo. Does the events of the weekend change the situation materially? Does it mean that you have to think differently about support for Israel, or are you as focused as you were on the legality or illegality of Israel's actions in Gaza?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the fundamental answer is we have a process for assessing Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and the effect that should have on our export licenses. We've been through that process, and I announced that in Washington last week. But I think the broader point you make, which is, would it be right for Britain, uniquely amongst countries of our size and scale who are friends of Israel, would it be right for us uniquely to put in place an arms embargo? I think the attack on Israel by Iran demonstrated that Israel not only has a right to defend itself, but also needs the ability to defend itself from that sort of attack. I hope it reminds the world, including, the commentariat here in the UK, that Iran is the malign influence. These are the ones funding Hamas and Hezbollah and causing so many of these problems. And we have to recognise that that's something we have to deal with.
Do we not also have to deal with what is happening in Gaza?
Yes.
There are serious concerns about the level of casualties, tens of thousands of people killed in the retaliation by Israel against Hamas after what happened, the shocking events of October the 7th. But you now have a situation where the people of Gaza face famine. And we also had the issue where aid workers, our own aid workers, were killed by Israeli airstrikes. What are you doing in order to alleviate the crisis that faces Gaza and to tell Israel to change its policy or its tactics, which lead to the deaths of our own aid workers?
Well, we're doing all of those things, particularly on the aid front, where right from the start we have been very aggressive, actually pushing the Israelis to say you have to open ports, you've got to open more points of crossing, you've got to allow more aid in, you've got to change the way you check the aid, you've got to make sure the aid can move around Gaza. We have been hammering that for weeks, and many people said I was too aggressive in the way I dealt with Israel over these issues. I don't regret that at all. Since last week, Israel has said it is going to allow in 500 trucks a day. It's going to open the port of Ashdod. It's going to open a new crossing point into Gaza. Look, we will check these things day by day to check they're actually happening. But that is the most important thing we can do to avoid famine in Gaza, to get the food, the water, the medicine and the shelter to people who need it there. And and in terms of what we've done directly, we've trebled our own aid budget when it comes to Gaza. We were the first to clear the maritime route of aid going from Cyprus to Israel and on to Gaza, one of the first to drop aid out of aeroplanes with the Jordanians, and, of course, a big funder and supporter of the effort that's going in by truck. But we absolutely have to be clear, more of that has to be done. The Israelis have now said the right things. They've got to do the right things.
We're facing great instability in the Middle East, also in Ukraine. You were in the US last week. You met with the former President Donald Trump. I'm not going to ask you to reveal to us the details of your private conversations, but let me ask you this. Is former President Trump, who could be the president again in November, do you think he is a reliable partner for Britain and NATO and the world when it comes to dealing with these very difficult issues?
Well, that's absolutely why I had that meeting. And as you know, Ed, it's perfectly normal for a British Foreign Secretary or British Prime Minister to meet with opposition leaders in other countries or to meet with potential presidents. I remember as Prime Minister, meeting with people that were standing to be president. So the point of the conversation
is... You chose not to meet with him in 2016 when he was the candidate then.
That's true, although I wasn't around for long in 2016, sadly, as we both know. But the point of having that conversation is to talk about Gaza and Israel, to talk about Ukraine. Look, it's not up to us who the Americans elect. We must work with whoever they do. And we want to make sure that partnership is as strong as possible, and particularly on the issue of Ukraine and on the issue of NATO. The argument I'd make to all my colleagues who are foreign ministers is we've got to get NATO in the strongest possible position between now and November. We've got to get Ukraine into the best possible position between now and November. And then whoever is president will be investing in success rather than trying to deal with failure. And those are some of the points that I've been making wherever I've been, including with Donald Trump.
France this morning, Foreign Secretary, has stepped up security around Jewish schools and synagogues, partly as a response, says the Interior Minister there, to what is happening between Israel and Iran. The Minister, Gérald Darmanin, says, as Passover approaches and given the current international situation, I've told local officials to significantly step up security at places visited by our Jewish compatriots, especially with regards to synagogues and Jewish schools. Do you think that those communities may face backlash here, and has equal consideration been given?
Well, they shouldn't face a backlash. It's appalling, some of the anti-Semitism we see in our country. But to be fair to the Prime Minister, he has been very much ahead of the curve on this and announced a funding package for the Community Security Trust, which is the organisation that does amazing work to keep schools and synagogues and Jewish community centres safe. And I think for the first time has put that funding on a multi-year basis and increased it. So the resources are there, and I know that the Home Secretary will be thinking about whether there's more we need to do to work with them and to reassure people Jewish people in the UK.
Very quickly, because I know you have to go, former Chancellor George Osborne is convinced that you'd be a great Foreign Secretary if Keir Starmer wins the general election. If he offered you the job, would you say yes?
There's absolutely no prospect of that happening. I'm a Conservative and I'm proud to be working for a Conservative government. I obviously regret that these days you spend more time with George Osborne than I do, and but I gather you're doing a great job together.
So you'd say no?
No, I'm very happy to be serving under Rishi Sunak. I'm a Conservative. I work for Conservative governments. I did lead a coalition government, but that's as far as I'd be taking it.
David Cameron, thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning.